Paul talks about it in verse 6. He says, godliness and contentment is great gain. That's the solution that's being described here. So in other words, simplicity helps us grow in godliness. That's the benefit of when we choose to live a simple life. And so when we live with a sense of godliness, we're living with a sense of embracing God's grace in our life and seeking out God's grace in our life. So one way is by seeking the ways of Christ. First, Jesus said in Matthew 6:33, when he was talking about worrying, when he was talking about meeting our needs, he says, but seek for his solution. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. What was Jesus saying? Jesus was saying that if you really want to be able to, have security and meet needs and live simply and content, then the response is to pursue God and to seek out what God's desire is. The message in that is that if everything isn't about Christ first, then nothing is. You could sit there and say, well, my Sundays, I was this way kind of. My Sundays are I give all to Jesus. It's all about Christ. And I can feel good about that when all the real estate agents are working on Sunday and I'm saying, I can make it without working on Sunday. And I can feel like, okay, then the rest of my week is fine. No. I could be the extreme and say, I'll give everything I have. I'm going to look at me, I'm going to give it all away. But Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13, he said, if I give everything to everybody, but I have not love, it's nothing. It's about pursuing the will of Christ, seeking out what Christ's desire is, finding out and looking at what Christ would want. In your insert, there's 10 practices of how to find a simple life that are being described there. Every one of them, if you look through them, are seeking the mind of Christ. What would Christ want? And that's what your motive in the way that you move through life then, and that simplicity of godliness is looking for Christ's will in every area of life. And then in the process then, discovering the presence of Christ in every area of your life. That's the beauty of it, of this godliness, is that godliness is opening yourself up to truly the presence of God everywhere in your life. And all of a sudden you're like, man, look at him. He's all over the place. You begin to see him at work in your life. And you see how he's working in every aspect, in every area of your life. Simplicity invites us into these daily pleasures that can open us up to God and who is present everywhere. And so simplicity kind of gives us margin and space so that we actually stop and we notice and like, wow, look what God is doing. Look where he is. Because otherwise we're so busy we don't know it. And so simplicity removes those distractions that often keep us away from noticing God and where he's at. But then through that, simplicity helps us grow in contentment. What happens then, God becomes our peace and security, so we don't need things. In other words, when you are seeking out the mind of Christ, when you're seeing God work, there's a shifting in your thinking where all of a sudden you recognize, I'm not dependent on the things that I make. I'm not dependent on the things that I buy. I'm not dependent on a big house or all these cars. These things I'm not concerned with, because I know I'm in the presence of a God who will take care of me. I know I'm in the presence of a God who will provide. Hebrews 13:5-6 says this, keep your life free from the love of money and be content with all you have, for he has said, he being God, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? Hey, if God is with us, we have peace and security. You can look at the situation where you're like, oftentimes when you're struggling, people have said it's true. You get a bill in the mail, say, hey, God, you got a bill. Just let you know. It's about that interaction, the presence of God. And I don't mean to be facetious about it. Obviously, God works in those situations through us. But God will provide. And you begin to experience the grace of God working in your life as you see him providing in that. And it breaks us free of the propaganda that we receive that tells us, no, we need that. You need this, you need that, you need that. It also frees us up to enjoy the gifts that God has intended for us. I mean, the video talked about looking up at the stars. I mean, we actually create the margin, the space in our life where when we see God at work, we actually begin to enjoy the gifts God. I mean, there's something about God giving you something in a gift where it makes it all more special than something I went out and I bought with a credit card. You know? I mean, it's just, this is God giving it. And everything, every possession you have has a greater level of meaning because you begin to appreciate the blessings of God in your life. And it's the flow of grace. I mean, all this is about the flow of God's grace filling our life. As we empty out the busyness of the distractions of this world, God fills it with His grace in all areas of our life. And so we experience and we begin to enjoy that because we feel the grace of God and we see the grace of God at work in areas of our life. But then also we're freed up to participate in God's mission in this world. God blesses us beyond our needs for one purpose, so that we can be used by Him to meet the needs of others. I mean, that's really the main reason God does that. God is at work in this world, and rather than sending me money, as an example, or someone, I shouldn't say me, a person in need with money, he will give it to someone else to go meet that need. I mean, that's the creative way of God. He can go direct, and sometimes He does, but for the most part, He uses other people and He works through it. And so when we become content and we learn to live well within our means, and in fact, those who get that begin to even find more ways to be even more simplified, because it creates more opportunity through the resources they have to go out and be a part of what God is doing in more ways, and they become addicted to that and be a part of that. And we become a part of the mission of God to change the world. Even in something like, across the world where we feel like we're not making a difference, we can stop and say, but we are. When we acknowledge that part of what we gave was out there to be able to make a difference. That's the solution God gives us through His Word, is to shift our thinking to focus in on Christ and on Him, to be center of it, and then learning to live with this simplified life that frees us from the deceptions that are often given us and opens us up. I mean, most people, I think even here, no one in here doesn't want to give to the church. No one in here doesn't want to serve. Maybe there's a few. I stand corrected. Raise your hands. Most of us would say, I can't afford to, or I don't have the time. Most of us would say that. And so if you're in that kind of a place, the question is, where do you need to simplify your life so that it isn't about that? Because the enemy, the whole intent of the enemy is to get you in that place where, yeah, you can be a Christian, but you're a Christian off by yourself because you don't have the money or the time, the resources, I shouldn't say money, the resources or the time to be able to be a part about what God is doing. Which kind of leads into the last part here. It's the reward. The reward that comes from this is what it's about. And this reward is this eternal wealth that Scripture talks about. When we empty ourselves of the worldly things, God fills us with the eternal things. And that becomes full in our life and becomes a part of it to where we begin to enjoy it. But the beauty of it is not we're sending money. I used that a few weeks ago. We're not sending money ahead that we never get to enjoy until we die and we're in heaven. But the eternal things we enjoy right now as a part of what God is doing. One of them is that we know Christ more. As Paul said, I read it in the beginning, and Scott mentioned before about, he says, his only ambition is to know Christ. When we're in that place of simplicity, in that place of pursuing less of this world and more of God, in that process we experience His grace and we know Him more. He becomes personal to us. The relationship becomes one in love. As you interact with a spouse or a friend, the more you interact with that person, the greater you come to know them. The greater you enjoy that relationship, the greater and deeper that relationship becomes. And it's the same here, that God encourages us to pursue less of this world so that He can fill us more with Himself. And it's not just an intellectual concept, it's a relationship that we know more as a part of that. A relationship based on love and grace and gratitude. God's grace flowing through us through Christ. A relationship that causes us to wag our tail because of who God is and what we experience in Him. And so that's one of the rewards, is about knowing more. Another one is that our life is transformed. That's a word that a lot of people don't necessarily like. I mean, I don't like to be changed. I like who I am, and I know there's a whole book out about why men hate church, for example, because they always talk about love and they're hugging and they're singing, and what guy wants to be that? Well, that's just God creates a way where we truly become, because the reality is that when God is filling us, it's transforming our character. And so the character descriptions the Bible talk about is loving and compassionate and merciful and patient and kind and forgiving. Words that every one of us in any relationship would certainly want to be able to see more of. But more importantly, in our relationship with Christ, they become the very fabric of who we are. And in doing that, that's the thing that people see and they're thinking, whatever you're smoking, I want to have, because, man, you are a different person. They see the transformation process, and that's a natural product of what happens when we're allowing God to fill us with Himself as opposed to with the things of the world. Because the things of the world do the opposite. They pull us away. They isolate us. I said earlier, create individualism and loneliness. And we're all on Facebook, but we don't know anybody. It's just, we don't really know each other. There was a guy, it was funny, I was offended because I sucked into it. He changed his birth date. His birth date was like a month ago. He's a friend. He's a youth worker. This is things youth workers do. And so, everybody sent their happy birthdays to him on Facebook. Well, 2 weeks went by. He changed his profile and made, the next day, his birthday. And he got a ton of happy birthdays again. He says there was only 4 people who either posted or whatever said, "Hey, man, this ain't your birthday. What's up?" To him, it validated the fact that we don't really pay attention. That's not a relationship. And that's the kind of thing that, that gets transformed and changed. And so that's a part of that process. But anyway, the last one is that God's mission becomes our passion. So often in the church, and I'm very cautious about it, and I don't always do well about it, we can describe things that need to be done. We can talk about, we need to help out the kids in the Sudan. We can go, this week we're going to do the Walk for Life. And, we fed the homeless the other week. And on and on and on. And people can feel like, oh, man, they're just weighing us down with things to do. And so, even as a church, we think, man, we got to be careful. And to some extent, that's true. But the greater problem is the fact that we are so caught up with the things of this world that we look at those things as a job, or as a duty, or as a burden, or as some obligation. We miss the whole point. The whole point is God creates those opportunities so it becomes a passion for us. That we are excited to be able to know that we are connected with God as He reaches out to people, that we're a part of that flow of God's grace in the lives of people, and I get to be one of them. That's a part, who said, and it's like the guy, it's the basketball's been going on. It's the guys on the bench who are sitting there watching a great game and they're thinking, they're never going to pick me. I'm third string. And the coach says, "Hey, Mark, you're in." You can't tell me that guy's sitting there thinking, "Oh, what an obligation. I was really hoping I'd be out of it." Man, come on, coach. I'm gonna have to shower. No, they're pumped up because they get to be a part of this event, this experience, this game that's going on. That's us. We get to be a part of that. When God calls us to a situation where we can respond and be a part of it, even if it's the giving of money, but even bigger than that, when we're out there serving and helping a Tracy Interfaith or Pregnancy Resource or any of these, every one of these is an opportunity where we get to be the hand of God in the life of people. We get to be able to show grace to others. We be in our own resources. Forget that. You just get to go over to someone and help them out. You got a neighbor that you can go mow their lawn, or you got someone that you need to say, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to fix your car. Bring it to the mechanic. It's all taken care of. I know you got some trouble. Let me fix it." We get to be a part of that grace of God that flows, and it becomes a passionate addiction. I've used it. Here's another resource. I need to find more analogies. I've talked about it, but it's new. The TV Secret Millionaire. You guys have seen that. I've used it a couple weeks ago. Anyway, last week, they had a guy come in from some place in the world to Skid Row in L.A. And so he's helping out over there. And there's a scene there where, he's obviously, every one of them, they're always changed as a result of this experience, And I have no doubt they are.